Okay, so this next section has to do with the role of lipoproteins in inflammation. This is the beginning of the many pathways that we'll be talking about in this class. So it's really important that you get a foundation, a good foundation of this pathway. And you'll find that most of these pathways, what I'll do is I'll put them on Blackboard. There'll be some practice that you can do to make sure that you have a good understanding of it. So it's, again, for this class, it's important not just to understand and memorize the pathway, but also understand how to use it. And we'll talk more about that as we go along. So this is really the role of lipoproteins. And think of lipoproteins as you may have heard of the HDL as the good cholesterol, which picks up excess cholesterol and returns it to the liver. You also have the VLDL, which transports triglycerides to cells, which we'll talk more about that in lesson number 3. And then we have the LDL. We probably have all heard of the LDL, the low density lipoprotein. That's considered the bad cholesterol, but as it delivers cholesterol to arterial tissues. It actually, LDL, even though it's considered the bad cholesterol, it actually has an important role in our body in which it delivers cholesterol to tissues. The problem with it is that when you have too much of it, that's when it can lead to cardiovascular disease, atherosclerosis, the plaque buildup, which is what we're going to be talking about subsequently here. A couple terms you should be familiar with is monocyte. Again, a monocyte is a type of white blood cell and is part of the human body's immune system. So monocytes are produced by the bone marrow from these special stem cells called hematopoietic stem cells, and that we're going to talk about in just a little bit. It's important to know that monocytes are stored in the spleen, and also about half of them circulate in the blood. And the idea is that their monocytes are attracted to damaged sites. So whenever you cut yourself or there's injury in the body, monocytes are triggered from the immune system to go and help heal that area. The thing is that when you have too many of them, that's when the problems can happen. Because what happens is when they get into the monocyte, enters the damaged tissue through that endothelial layer of the blood vessel, it can actually undergo a series of changes to become a macrophage. And then those macrophages are the predominant cells that are involved in creating the progressive plaque lesion. So what happens is monocytes, when you have damage to the endothelial layer of the coronary arteries, monocytes are triggered to go there to help remove that LDL. The problem is when you have too much LDL, too many monocytes are attracted to that the coronary artery. They're changed into macrophages, and then that is a precursor to plaque buildup. And that's what we're going to be talking about going forward, is how does that plaque build up. So here's the first of many pathways, and this kind of lays the foundation for the development of atherosclerosis. A couple things about these slides is whenever you see a pathway, I try to give an overview or a take-home message as to the point of the slide. So always look at the title of the slide as an indication as to the main idea of the slide. Also, all these pathways, after the pathway, you'll see that I've done a step-by-step of each of the steps for you following each of the slides. So you have a good idea of what we're talking about in terms of written form. So not only do you have a picture of it, but also you will have the step-by-step written for you as well. Also on Blackboard, all these pathways, you're going to be able to practice these and put these in proper order. And again, it's important to have a good understanding, and so you can use the practice on Blackboard to test your knowledge and understanding of the pathway. And the final thing we'll be doing is what's called thinking review questions, which will ask you questions about a pathway. If you increase or decrease something, what is the outcome? So we'll talk more about those in just a little bit. But first, let's understand what's happening here with the initial development of atherosclerosis. And it begins with the development of monocytes, and then to how those monocytes end up becoming macrophages. So we have three areas. We have the bone marrow here, we have your blood vessels here, and then here we have the inflamed tissue. In our case, it's going to be in the coronary arteries. So beginning over here in the bone marrow, we have the special stem cell where they have the hematopoietic stem cell. It's developed there in the bone marrow. And then what happens is inside the bone marrow, we have these special receptors called the Ly6C receptors. I didn't name it, that's just what they're called. But the idea is that this receptor combines with the monocyte, and now it becomes what's called an inflammatory monocyte, which means that it's attracted to inflammation or injury in the body. Once we have this monocyte is created, this monocyte then will make its way through out of the bone marrow and into the blood. And then it will continue to circulate in the blood. However, we have this MCP1 receptor. MCP1 stands for monocyte chemotactic protein 1. And what happens is this receptor that's actually made in the bone marrow, secreted into the blood, what it will do is it will actually attach to the monocyte. So now we have a monocyte that has a MCP1 receptor. Meanwhile, as that continues to circulate, in the coronary artery intima, you have the development of a pathogen. In our case, it's going to be an LDL. So LDLs from our diet have made their way into the blood and then eventually into the coronary arteries. And what happens is this LDL that starts to build up will send a signal to the endothelial layer here of the coronary artery, and it will tell the coronary artery endothelial layer, hey, go ahead and make this MCP1. And again, very important, the LDL does not become MCP1, but rather the LDL will communicate with the endothelial layer of the coronary artery and says, hey, I need you, you have all the ingredients to make MCP1, now I'm telling you to make MCP1. So the LDL is kind of like a trigger to let the endothelial layer of the coronary artery know that, hey, go ahead and make MCP1. Well, now that you have MCP1 here on the endothelial layer, and we have a monocyte that has an MCP1 receptor, what happens is usually when you have a receptor and you have the protein, they're attracted to each other. So what ends up happening is this monocyte will be attracted to, because it has an MCP1 receptor, will be attracted to the MCP1 on the endothelial layer. And so what happens is that monocyte will make its way to the area of the coronary artery that has MCP1. And so that's how you get monocytes closer or help get it into or near the coronary artery intima. And then through a series of steps, what ends up happening is, and we'll talk about it later, but the monocyte will make its way through the endothelial layer into the coronary artery intima, and then through a series of steps, it gets changed into a macrophage. We'll talk more in detail in the subsequent slides what happens with 6, 7, and 8 in just a little bit. For now, for this slide, what you need to understand is how is the stem cell made, and how is it then secreted into the blood, combines with the MCP1 receptor, and then makes its way into the intima and eventually into a macrophage. It's important then, what I would recommend that you do here is that you take a few moments and study this slide. Take a piece of paper and actually write these steps in your own words, step by step. When you have some familiarity with this, what I would then recommend is that you go to Blackboard and that you actually use the exercise of putting these in proper order. It will help test your memory. And make sure that you have a good understanding of this pathway. So pause. What I would recommend is after this lesson is over, this section is over, that you take a moment and you get a good understanding of this pathway. And again, this just reminds us of exactly where this coronary artery, this plaque is building up. Again, we have our coronary arteries here that we talked about in lesson number 1. So again, this just gives you an idea of where it's happening. And also, again, just to illustrate again, here we have the lumen of the artery. Again, it's happening here in the tunica intima or interna is where it's happening. Again, here's just another slide from our lesson 1 just to show you again. Here's the endothelial layer And here, right here, in this extracellular matrix of the intima is where we have the plaque is starting to build up. So again, this had this first part as the foundation by which plaque or atherosclerosis begins. So make sure you have a good understanding of this before we move on to how LDL makes its way into the coronary artery intima to help trigger this atherosclerotic process.